Guys, today I put my shirt on backwards, and like at this point, let's just crawl back under the covers and go back to sleep. Because if you can't even put the shirt on right, like, what hope does the rest of the day have? Well, hello there. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley. Today we're going to be discussing thriller novels, and I'm so excited! Thriller genre, the thriller genre is a genre that I've recently rediscovered, the element of mystery, thriller. It's all just so great and lovely, and I want to talk about it a lot. So here we are doing that. Originally, this video was just me going to talk about famous thriller novels and some famous authors, and I was really interested in the fact that there are several different types of thrillers, so we're going to talk about 4 of them today. This video will cover psychological thrillers, action thrillers, crime thrillers, and political thrillers. I also just want to point out that, like many things in literature, this subject is obviously very subjective. I will list authors who typically write the same type of thrillers, but obviously there are a lot of elements here that bleed and blend together. And if you don't see your favorite author listed here, put them down below. This was just me trying to Google things, and if I missed it, I'm sorry, and I would still love to know, so put recommendations down below. Also, one last thing before we get started. One concern or problem that I've heard a lot about from content creators on BookTube is that authors of color don't get the same hype or the same budget or the same energy. I've heard this from multiple creators, and I kind of just stored it in the back of my head as like, that's really interesting. I need to dig more into that, and this was an opportunity to do that a little bit. I noticed that when I was Googling authors, it was primarily white authors that were coming up. Now, lots of people talk about the fact that the thriller genre is owned by white men. Like, those are the prominent authors, they make the most money, they sell the most books, which, like, I'm not opposed to reading a book written by a white man. But also, that's the default narrative, and I would love to read books by women and people of color, because obviously it's not just white men who can write thriller novels really well. It's just that they get more attention than books written by people of color or by women of color. So as I was putting this video together, I made sure that I included the staples classics, so to speak, like people who are really famous in these genres, and then also kind of look like I was flipping off. It's Fourth Finger, promise. I also made sure that when I was putting this list together, I found people of color with books that I was really interested in reading. I made sure, as I was putting this together, that these were not pity reads. I didn't include books unless I was genuinely interested in the plots, because I really believe that women and people of color can write books that I will find just as engaging and just as interesting. So if there was a plot that I didn't find interesting, I didn't include it. And that was with white authors as well as people of color. First up, we have psychological thrillers. This genre emphasizes the mental state of the characters, which can mean their thoughts, their perceptions, their feelings. Mental disorders are a big part of this genre, I think, and it often involves unreliable narrators and kind of mind games on the reader. The thrill kind of comes from uncertainty about what the character is going to do. This genre often overlaps a little bit with psychological horror. And I'm not a huge fan of the horror genre, so this probably will be a little bit hit and miss for me. Some famous and well-established authors in this field are Nicci French, Patricia Highsmith, Jonathan Kellerman, Paula Hawkins, and of course Stephen King. He writes a lot of psychological thrillers. So one of the authors that I was really interested in was Nicci French. This is actually a husband and wife duo. We have Nikki Bernard and her husband, Sean French. I love the idea of a couple who sit down together and in their free time for fun, they write psychological thriller novels together. That just sounds romantic, but also they're writing thriller novels, so it's not romantic, but it is romantic. So anyway, one book that I thought was really interesting by them is Dark Saturday. Our protagonist is a psychologist who is asked to speak with a woman who is accused of killing her family. The more the psychologist digs into this, the more she starts to think that the teen, who is now a woman, was actually innocent and was framed for that crime. And the more she digs into it, the more she realizes the person who did commit the actual murders probably doesn't want this secret revealed and is willing to go to great lengths to keep that secret from coming out. Next, we have the author Hai Young Poon. I'm really sorry if I just butchered that. This is a very famous South Korean writer, and her works have won a ton of awards, both from Korea and from America. The book that sounded most interesting to me and has been translated into English is The City of Ash and Red. Our protagonist is sent by his company to exterminate rats in a different country, and he arrives in that different country, and no sooner does he arrive than a pandemic breaks loose, and he's detained by quarantine officials and promptly forgot in prison. He frantically tries to phone the company. He finally gets a hold of his friend and realizes to his grief that his wife has been killed, and he himself is the main murder suspect. He's astonished and terrified and locked in prison, but the more time he spends in prison, the more time he realizes that maybe he's not as innocent as he thinks he is. This gives me chills to think about. The idea that, like, you would just have gapes in your memory where you're committing horrible crimes, but you yourself are not conscious of it. That's like my worst nightmare. So this, I think, will be a really interesting, terrifying read. Next, we have action thrillers. The point of an action thriller is to keep you on your toes and keep you engaged and concerned about the narrative. Think chase scenes, think explosions, think wild rides through the cities, lots of changing scenes, risk, danger, all the things. Most thriller novels have an element of action to them, but the emphasis in an action novel is the movement. Some common plots in this genre include kidnapping, heists, revenge, and ransom money or ransom deals. Authors that are pretty established in the genre include Dan Brown, Sam Christner, and J.D. Roberts, who is actually Nora Roberts, who is a really famous romance writer. And I'm really interested to know how the romance translates into the thriller novel writing. Like, I think it's really interesting that she's written a ton of romance, but also a ton of thriller. Like, she has like 54 books that are kind of in the thriller genre and a ton of romance novels. And like, I think that's amazing. Go her. Whatever her real name is, go her. So Dan Brown is like the epitome of the action novel thriller writer. One book that I'm really interested to read by him is Deception Point. This follows a scientist named Rachel Sexton, and she's sent by the president to investigate a meteorite that has landed and found by NASA in Antarctica, I believe. Everything seems pretty routine. She's working with an oceanographer, and then they discover a terrible conspiracy threatening the United States, and then they're on the run for their lives. I have read 2 of Dan Brown's books so far, and I've really enjoyed them. So I am excited to just read all of the things that he's written and to enjoy them. We also have Bluebird by Attica Locke. This follows the story about a black Texas Ranger named Darren Matthew who left Texas the moment he could and hasn't looked back. He is forced to go back to his hometown when his job sends him back to investigate a series of murders. The murder of a black lawyer and a local white woman. There's a lot of tension simmering along racial fault lines, and Darren has to solve the crimes before all-out war breaks out. This sounds super interesting to me, and I feel like this, if done well, is going to be super interesting and probably really eye-opening. Also, I'm really hoping that books written by people of color give a much wider, more realistic view of people of color, as opposed to the thriller novels where there's a lot of stereotypes and they're really unfair. Next, we have crime thrillers. These novels tend to revolve around the idea that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and it's up to the good guy to apprehend the criminal or prevent the crime from happening. Good and evil play really heavily into this genre, and it's less a mystery to the reader about who the criminal is and more about the good guys trying to catch him. Some really famous people in this genre are Elmore Leonard, Michael Connelly, David Baldacci, and Nelson DeMille. And I also want to preface that these are people that came up in the Google search for crime thrillers. So like I said, if you're missing your favorite author, put them down below. All right, one book that I'm really excited to read about is called Plum Island by Nelson DeMille. I've read 2 of Nelson DeMille's books. Super excited to continue reading them. In this book, it follows a former New York police detective who studied homicides. There we go. And he's currently recovering from 2 gunshot wounds in his hometown. Because he is a homicidal detective, he's asked to look into a case where his 2 neighbors were shot and killed. If this is anything like Nelson DeMille's other novels, you know who the villain is, and you're rooting for John to try and catch the villain. I think Nelson DeMille is a great writer. He relies a little bit too much on stereotypes. This is the first book in the John Corey series, so I'm interested to see where it all started. I'm excited for a good scary ride. Okay, and this next one I'm really excited to read. It's called My Sister, the Serial Killer, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I apologize in advance. This is by Oyinkan Braithwaite. I really apologize. And this book follows two sisters, obviously. We have Cordy, who kills her best friends in self-defense, and then we have her sister Ayula, who helps her to hide the bodies. Ayula isn't okay with this, but family comes first. She's trying to protect her sister, and then her sister starts to date the cute doctor at the medical clinic where she works, and she really likes this doctor, but also she feels a strong loyalty towards her sister, and she doesn't want either one of them to be in trouble. Like, she doesn't want to turn her sister in, but she doesn't want the doctor to get knifed in the back, so there's some decisions that have to be made here. This sounds terrifying. This also sounds really good, and I'm really excited to dig into this one. This is probably the one that I want to dig into most out of the list of books that I've compiled. And then lastly for this video, we have political thrillers. Not surprisingly, this usually involves some sort of political struggle. Some common themes in this genre include political corruption, threats of terrorism, pandemics, and general just conspiracy theories. Famous authors in this subject are David Baldacci, James Patterson, Tom Clancy, and Jason Matthews. David Baldacci is a name that I see everywhere, so we're going to do one of his novels. And I'm going to use a book that I already own, The Camel Club. This follows a shocking murder of somebody high up in the government, and the Secret Service are scrambling to try and figure out who committed the murder. They end up asking 4 conspiracy theorists to come together to try and catch the villain and prevent a international terrorist crisis. The plot for this sounds really interesting. I think it's a really interesting idea to think of the Secret Service needing to work with conspiracy theorists. I don't know how often that happens. That doesn't seem realistic, but also maybe it is. I don't know. So I'm really excited for this one. Next, we have August Snow by Stephen Mack Jones. This follows August, who is an African-Mexican police officer. At least he was until a conspiracy of cops and police officers got him fired. He wants nothing to do with that life until he's contacted by a very wealthy bank owner who asks him to look into a case. He wants nothing to do with it, but then the bank owner winds up dead the next day, and he suspects foul play. He decides that he's going to investigate on his own terms and see what he can uncover. This sounds fantastic. This is book 1, and the third book I believe is coming out soon, so I'm excited to read the first one and the second one. I feel like there's just so much room for potential with this. He's been ousted by the police officers. He's going to go back and prove them all wrong, possibly prove that they're corrupt. I think this is just right up my alley. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on new authors to read, some oldies and goodies to read, and just a wide variety of things that we can all delve about and talk about. All right, I'll talk to you all in the comments and in the next video.